friends, colleagues, students, and guests, greetings and welcome to my final doctoral lecture in choral and orchestral conducting. This lecture was crafted and designed to be followed by a performance for which you will be invited at the end of this presentation. So please stick around. I would like to acknowledge the presence tonight, both online and in person, of my supervisory committee, composed of Dr. Nicole Biamonte, Dr. Jean-Sébastien Vallée, Professor Guillaume Bourgogne, and Dr. Simon Aldridge. My intent tonight is to share with you the fruits of the past 4 years' research. But my hope in sharing with you a small portion of the different findings that I've made is to contribute to the ongoing long Mendelssohn Renaissance, and to suggest a few new routes in order to better comprehend and appreciate the music of one of the most prominent composers of the 19th century. Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, grandson of the famous Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, was a child prodigy labeled by Schumann the Mozart of the 19th century. He was the second of 4 siblings and brother to Fanny Mendelssohn's Anselm. He was also a polyglot, a polymath, credited to be the restorer of the oratorio, champion of Bach and Handel's music, as you might know, a fine conductor, teacher, piano virtuosi, accomplished painter, avowed Lutheran of Jewish origins, and of course, a prolific composer despite his very short life. He passed at 38 years of age. Discussing the art and work of this multifaceted artist is no small feat, for the confluences of talents, influences and convictions operating in his inner being are many, and admittedly, by moments, very complex. So, acquiring a holistic viewpoint of the composer and of his aesthetic is difficult for a few reasons, and you have them there. First of all, he disliked pretentious conversation and strict categorization of art. Any discussion that would border on aesthetic would make him feel dumb and dejected. He developed a lifelong animosity towards music critics. He resisted public written statement, any debate, any manifesto. And coming from his father, he held a conviction that he would be known to the world through only the voice of his composition. Simply put, for him the proof was in the pudding. The truth resided in the artistic practice, not the talking about it. Observations had to be made from experience and grounded in concrete evidence. Information must be gleaned, therefore, from a lot of private letters, because he did not publish any statement. And so, we do have a special letter. A letter in which he wrote on October 15th, 1842, known as the Locus Classicus. He declared, "What the music I love expresses to me is thought not too unclear for words, but rather too clear." The words remained ambiguous, but we all understand the music. Do we? Do we all understand the music? This quote raises some really important questions. Is this his official credo to abide by? Is this part of a larger credo? If music is more precise than words, then what were the universal communicative capacities of music according to the composer? In sum, my main research question was, how are we to understand what Mendelssohn aims to communicate through his music? And so here's the title of my thesis. I took a quote from the same quote I just had before. But we all understand the music, a look into the rhetorical affinities, extra musical referentialities, and musical poetic relationships found in Mendelssohn's cantata, Die erste Walpurgisnacht. And so the goal of this research is to investigate the constituents of Mendelssohn's aesthetics, to discern operating frameworks behind and within his composition in order to gain insights on Mendelssohn's distinctive position regarding music's communicative abilities, and consequently better grasp the potency of his musical style and content. So to do so, I decided to follow what Mendelssohn himself would say: go to the music, make observation from evidence, and to have a case study, which will be, as I mentioned, Die Cantata, Die erste Walpurgisnacht, which will be addressed in the second part of this presentation. So let's dig in. At the heart of this question is definitely the subject of communication. I decided to begin by looking into how the composer communicates. How does he address people in his surrounding, in his letters, not just in the composition, but in his way of life. So let's look at Mendelssohn, the communicator. In a multiplicity of ways and never lacking in detail, craft, and eloquence, he relentlessly aimed to share his thoughts, experiences, and the richness of his inner self with the different relationships he fostered. The key word here is really the strength of his inner self. And as we'll see, he really wanted to share that in a multiplicity of ways. For example, he maintained many relationships in his life. He wrote more than 5,000 letters, which we still do have today, in the Green Books in Oxford. And he received none other than 7,000 letters. Corresponding was a hallmark of the Mendelssohn household. Even the parents had the same habit. They even kept the letters of older generations before them. It was really a big hallmark of the Mendelssohn's household, and it became a way of life for the composer. And it was a passage obligé. For in these letters, we can have, because as you remember, we don't have a manifesto from Mendelssohn, but in the letters, here and there, we can discover little hints of his aesthetics. And according to his brother, his younger brother, Paul Mendelssohn, there's a promise when we go into the letter, because he says we can have a more definite idea of his individuality, but also we can understand his brother's music better and more precisely. Now, Mendelssohn was, as I said, a strong communicator, not just with words and letters, but also with his demeanor. All of his friends in the memoirs, and there are quite a few memoirs, constantly talk about how he could not conceal what was going on inside. He would speak vividly with his hands, with his body. When he would agree with something or disagree with something, he could not conceal his inner being. When he would be playing music, it was the same. We have many testimonies of how he moved his head back and fro, to and fro, and how when he was speaking about something interesting for him, his eyes were sparkling with pleasure. So even in his demeanor, he aimed to communicate. He communicated, obviously, as a conductor. Mendelssohn is credited to be the first conductor to have a baton. He wanted to have clarity in his message. So the non-verbal communication possibilities, but also limitations. What do I mean by that? Often as a conductor, he didn't want to be in the way of the music. So if to better communicate is to stop moving your hands, he would stop conducting altogether and imagine the musicians play and be out of the way of the music, so communication would be better. He also communicated with visual arts. Maybe you don't know, but Mendelssohn is an accomplished painter, not just a little painter on Sunday afternoon. He took many lessons, his family took lessons also, and he was very accomplished. When he would be traveling in Europe, he would constantly, if words could not describe a situation, he would always jot down in his little books images of the situation or paint it. Visual arts also had the ability of giving access to the world of inwardness, one's innermost feeling without the help of words. And I have some examples for you where he turned to painting when he was in moments of deep joy or deep sorrow. Because words could not do it, then painting could do it. Two very contrasting examples for you tonight. During his courtship with Cécile Jean Renaud, who would be his wife, "Such is my mood now the whole day. I can neither compose, nor write letters, nor play the piano. The utmost I can do is sketch a little." Imagine, so deeply in love, cannot compose. Nope, but I can do a little bit of drawing. And a completely contrasting example, upon the passing of his beloved sister Fanny, he said until now to his friend Klingemann, he was speaking, "I cannot at all think about work or music without feeling the greatest emptiness and desolation in my heart, in my mind, and in my heart." So since he could not work, he could not compose, he decided to subsume his grief in Switzerland with the family, where he stayed for 2 months, and he produced a series of 13 watercolors. And here's one of them. They're very beautiful, I told you, very accomplished painter. So, painting and visual arts also could be, for him, a way to communicate his inner being, his inner self, and the strength of his inner self. Now, let's go back now to what I called Das wahre Mendelssohn-Problem. It's a little bit of play on word from a very important author, Karl Dahlhaus, who talked about the Mendelssohn-Problem, talking about the renaissance of Mendelssohn and why was he put aside for so long. And it's a complicated conversation, and I don't want to go there tonight. But what I mean about the real Mendelssohn-Problem is what I just read before, which is called the Locus Classicus. I prepared tonight a longer excerpt from it, and I'm going to take the time to read it because this is really from this that stems the conversation about Mendelssohn's aesthetic. There is so much spoken about music, and yet so little is said. I believe that words are entirely insufficient for that, and if I should find that they were sufficient, then I would write music no more. People usually complain that music is so ambiguous, that what they should think of when they hear it is so unclear, whereas everyone understands words. But for me, and this is key, it is just the opposite. And not just with entire discourses, but also with individual words. These two seem to me so ambiguous, so unclear, so misleading in comparison to good music, which fills one's soul with a thousand things better than words. What the music I love expresses to me is thoughts not too unclear for words, but rather too clear. I therefore find in all attempts to put these thoughts into words something correct, but also always something insufficient and not universal. So this text is actually very pivotal about Mendelssohn. It has, as you can expect, generated a lot of opinions and a lot of different interpretations. So you understand the context? He was writing to a family relative, actually, of Cécile, his wife, and it was about die Lieder ohne Worte, which are songs for keyboard without text. And on it, many people tried to put text and add what they thought was behind the notes. And that's how he generated this answer. At the heart of this text is a very typical 19th century debate that quite a few scholars had, which was, should music be autonomous, or what some people call l'art pour l'art, or should it be referential, or what we call programmatic music? In other words, should music refer to something outside itself to be explained? Should it be linked to something else to give it meaning? Or should it just live on its own without the need of outside or extra musical discourse? Also at the heart of this text is the question of music's significance. What do I mean by that? Well, if we don't have a text, if it's textless, what does it say? What does it mean? He claimed that we all understand the music, so the question remains, what can music be really precise at? And lastly, another question, at least concerning Mendelssohn, is the word-music relationship that is kind of underneath this text, because, as you know, or maybe not, Mendelssohn, half of his output is vocal repertoire with text. So that's why I call it das wahre Mendelssohn-Problem. So let's begin with the context of words and emotions. One of the reasons why I think he said this text is because the semantic possibilities inherent to words ultimately result in abating the underlying strength and precision of a given thought or feeling. In other words, emotions find very poor delegates in words and consequently find themselves diminished. Whereas, on the other hand, music contained the noble ability not to dampen or to diminish the strength of an emotion. So the connection from what I undergo through on my emotion, when I try to use text to express that, something is wanting. Whereas when I use music, I feel it's more clear. A good example of that is in the letters again. On the surge of a very strong emotion, often Mendelssohn uses an expression. Da kann ich dir nicht beschreiben. I cannot describe you what I'm going through or what I'm feeling right now. Words cannot do it. They're not precise enough. I have an example again for you, again with Cécile, his lovely wife. He was writing to his mother here and he says, I simply cannot describe how each new day with Cécile fills me with happiness, how her charming character becomes increasingly benevolent and invigorating to me. There is indeed something inexhaustible about such genuine inner goodness. He wrote this 3 months into the marriage. So again, it's just to show you, I simply cannot describe, and I could bring so many examples tonight. Another thing that I believe that this text means is that Mendelssohn did not despise words, or he didn't doubt the words. Many scholars speak of Sprachskepsis, it's a hard one to say, and it's basically a term referring to the fact that he doubted words. He doubted they could not do their job, they could not be potent enough. But I a little bit disagree with that. I think it's a little bit different. I think he just saw them inefficient in certain specific roles. Actually, Mendelssohn loved words. He loved languages. He was a polyglot. He spoke many languages. He mastered them. Even more than that, I think underneath it, there's another quest for the composer. You can see it so clearly in the letters. It's the quest for le mot juste. I wanted to use the French expression because, again, it describes it so well. And for example, in the letters, often he will take another word from Greek, from Latin, from Italian to describe a situation. Because if it was just German, yeah, I could use the word, but I know of another word for that, and I'm going to use it. I want le mot juste to explain what I'm going through. So he loved languages, but sometimes they were inefficient in certain roles. Another example too is the fact he was very demanding with his translators. When he would compose in German and publish in, let's say, for England, they would be translated so they could be sung. At the time, people did not always sing the original language of a work, so many translations in the 19th century were done for French and in English, so they could sell more copies in other countries. And he was so demanding because he wanted le mot juste also into the translations. But now the next question, what about text music? As you can see in the diagram, we have the perfect relationship of music and ideas and emotions. That's good. Words to express emotion, no, a little bit inefficient for that, not the right role. But what about music and words? As I said, it's half of his repertoire. Let's continue. For Mendelssohn, not all texts were conducive to music. The texts that were too vivid in their emotions or too complex should be avoided, and he avoided them. They had to contain a precise, sincere, and universal emotion. A few scholars, Seaton, Ewens, and Cooper, they situate this particular approach amidst what they call the Second Berlin School, which was more conservative than the Schubertian Liederästhetik. Now, this school was about the Lieder, and they studied his aesthetic, these authors, really in the particular sort of box of the Lieder. But Mendelssohn composed a lot of other text music for choirs, incidental music for the stage also. And that's where I want to bring the conversation, is that most of what was discussed was not discussed on all the genre of his output. So let's continue. Music and text could collaborate, given that two things, and I agree with that, they both respond to the same underlying idea of the poetry. So if you look again at the little diagram, is the fact that they could be together if within a big circle, music and the text refer to a higher ideal. Meaning that they have specificities, text has specificities, music do too. They could be together, but better if they join on a higher scheme. I'll give you an example. If you put a song into music, Mendelssohn would not want to be too close to the elements of the song. Let's say a traveler on the road. But he would rather go to a higher ideal, higher thought, like love, because it could be a traveler on the road thinking of his loved one. So that he would connect to, or treason, or something noble, a higher thought, but not necessarily just the person walking on the road that sees a train, and I'm going to put the sound of a train in my music. You know what I mean? So he wants to go to higher thoughts and higher ideas where the music and the text could there collaborate. Secondly, the song had to represent these ideas musically on a higher sphere. That's it. Okay, conclusion for that second chapter. Given the right text, music and words could turn towards one another and merge despite their inherent species of precision. Mendelssohn respected both words and music's faculties when joining them in the work. I would also suggest that he also, and that's really key, adjusted his textual zoom according to dramatic needs. What I mean by textual zoom is that was the example I was giving. Sometimes he was okay to be close to small details of the text. For example, picture realism, where you want to show the bird, you want to show like images that you can see in the text. But he would rather go larger zoom and be on maybe a general feeling about the text and not necessarily the details in the text. So he plays with the zoom according to repertoire. And the piece we're going to see tonight, he plays a lot with the zoom, and he goes sometimes, I think, quite close and uses tone painting. And finally, we must keep in mind that not all vocal repertoire operate under the Berlin school. Third chapter, this is something I would like to propose tonight, and that's what I do in my research. I would like to suggest another way to look at this conundrum and how difficult it is to explain Mendelssohn's aesthetic. When I started to really appreciate the music of Mendelssohn, something that really struck me was the eloquence that was in the music. Why is it so eloquent? Why do I feel that someone is indeed musically speaking to me? Why? Then I started to dig, and I realized that he is like an orator. He is like a speaker. He does try musically to convey his inner self. And so I started to dig more and realized that he had a very unique upbringing. As I mentioned, he had access to different languages. He had different tutors. The 4 children had different tutors. They had 3 in total. And those tutors were very good. They could afford the best tutors of Berlin. And he was taught with the rest of his siblings into the Greek and Latin classical authors who perfected themselves the art of rhetoric. For example, Cicero, Horace, Tacitus, and to a lesser extent, Plato, Homer, and Sophocles. So Mendelssohn's letter, because of Le Mot Juste, remember, are filled with those quotes from the classical author. More than that, he was memorizing some excerpts because he was in Paris. He was writing to his tutor, and he says, I am done memorizing the first or second page of Cicero. So not only he was studying those texts, he was memorizing them. So despite the fact that he did not study rhetoric per se, he did study authors that did master rhetoric. And more than that, he memorized sections of their orations. Mendelssohn also quotes Cicero in his 5,000 letters a total of 16 times. Another great example to show how much he merged with the classical author is that at the age of 17, he translated for his tutor as a gift for his birthday the Horace Ars Poetica, which is a treatise, very important treatise for poets, but written in a rhetorical style. And we still have access to this day from his translation, which is very good. So what are the concepts that I did notice stemming out of his sort of encounter with those great and classic authors? Well, you might probably know the concept of decorum. Decorum, also known as appropriateness, is the need to refer one's message or contextualize one's message according to the addressee. It's positioned in the third officium, which is eloquatio. Similarly, Mendelssohn is always taking into consideration to whom he's writing a piece of music. And I'll give you an example. With the Sing Academy, when he was young, before his voice changed, he was an alto, and he would go with Fanny to rehearsal on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday night, sometimes even Monday nights they had to rehearsal. He would go to the Sing Academy, which was one of the most influential choral societies in Berlin. And there they rehearsed music of the Renaissance that was mainly written for 8-part harmony, double choir, antiphony, 3 choirs, 16 parts choir. They were known in Europe for being able to rehearse a lot of divisé in the music. And so when Mendelssohn wrote music for the Sing Academy later, he wrote it in 8-part harmony for double choir because they were studying the Bach motets and they were used to sing this music. Just to show you how always he was sensitive to decorum. Another example is all his piano music, which was really meant for the intimacy of domestic settings. So that's why so many of those lieder are so accessible and singable, because the people singing them often were amateurs. So he always contextualizes his music. You might also know the three persuasive appeals. They're quite known. We hear about them in business sometimes, but also in politics, right? The logos, the ethos, and the pathos, also known as the means of persuasion. Each pillar, and that's why I like that image that I found online, it's great because they have to be kept in balance. And this, I find, really represents well how Mendelssohn's approach composition, because he's like a funambulist. It's a matter of balance and degree and balance, and we're going to see that quickly. I'm going to cover each one of them. First one, ethos, I think probably is the biggest one for Mendelssohn. Ethos, out of this word, it means what? Ethical and moral character. This was right here for the composer. It was of utmost importance. I really like this quote that he said to Lobe, his colleague. Without talent, nothing can be done, but without character, just as little. Most evident in his dislikes, we can see his need for ethos or for noble and true character. He really despised French opera. When he went to Paris during his grand tour of Europe, he stayed there and he decided to go listen to Robert Le Diable by Meyerbeer. Meyerbeer was a composition colleague that studied with Celta, the same teacher as Mendelssohn. So he grew up with Meyerbeer, but they went completely like this. And Meyerbeer, in his opera, uses seducing and dancing nuns, of all things. And Mendelssohn was so scandalized and offended, he could not believe somebody would put something like that to music. It was morally offensive, and therefore the ethos was too affected for him to tolerate something like that. It's just to give you an example how. Another quote from the great scholar Benedict Taylor says, rightly or wrongly, everything is grounded for Mendelssohn in God, and this cannot help but affect the nature of his ethical and aesthetic decisions. And that's the case. Another good example is his Lutheran confirmation of 1825, which has gathered very little scholarly interest. I decided to take the time to look at it. He was very young, he was 16 years old, and that's when he decided to join the Lutheran faith and to be confirmed in the church with other candidates. But instead of discussing the theology like you would expect in such a document, he only talks, well, not only, but he constantly talks about the ways and the virtues to conduct his life. And I give you a few examples. Self-denial, meekness, humility, piety, undaunted candor, love, unselfishness, and the list goes on and on. Very ethical in character. The next persuasive appeal, pathos. You probably heard that one before too. And I like the Latin, which helps understand, affectus, right? Pathos refers to the emotional appeal that an orator can induce in the audience's state of mind, through which the hearers will come to differ in their judgments. It can also refer to the deeply felt passions, desires, and longings known as the affects, or as I said, affectus, affections. In Horace Ars Poetica, which he translated, if you remember, there's a famous quote, "If you want me to weep, you must yourself first feel pain." And that's the case, and don't forget he studied those texts. I give you here a few examples how Mendelssohn talks about the pathos in his letters. Don't forget that in 1820s, 1830s, the word emotion was just new. People didn't talk in terms of emotions before. They talked in terms of affects. The word is rather new, of new construct. So there's a few examples of what he used to speak of his pathos in his letters. Gemüt, Stimmung, Gefühl, Empfindung, Eindruck. I give you another example here, which he sent to Pastor Bauer. But no such thing exists as an excess of sensibility, and what is designated as such is in fact rather a dearth of it. The soaring, elevated emotions, the original word is Empfindung, inspired by music, so welcome to listeners, are no excess, for let him who can feel do so to the utmost of his power, and even more if possible. The importance of the pathos. So for Mendelssohn, music's potency resided in its capacity to induce both personally and collectively a strong pathos, working as a binding agent for mankind. And since he was so religious, he believed that this gift for feeling was coming from above, from God, Therefore, even the pathos had to be ethical, right? Because it mirrored the presence of God in us. So even the way you feel, it was also ethical way of feeling. And now lastly, the logos. Maybe you also know logos, which refers to words, orations, speeches, arguments, and reasons. Anything that is said. Logos is concerned more with the content rather than the style, and it's more aimed at arguments. For Mendelssohn, his compositional logos is not made of words, as we discussed, it's made of tones, musical sentences, movements, topics, figures, historical quotations, quite a bit of that, a stylistic reference, all built on the bedrock of normative conventions. More on that soon in the second part, we are getting to it. Mendelssohn's musical logos could contain words, but again, as we saw, as long as they contain ideas and feelings that were ethical, edifying, and complementary to the music's own inclinations. A last sort of rhetorical argument that comes out of his art, of Mendelssohn's art, is what we call epideictic rhetoric. We have usually there are three branches to rhetoric that we recognize. The first two are really known. The first one is used in politics a lot. It's decided to know what to do in the future. You present your facts, and politically, I would like the society to go this way for these reasons. We should take these decisions. So that's what we call deliberative rhetoric. In the courtroom, we have judicial rhetoric. That's about the past. We have to judge someone according to what happened. Is he guilty? Is he not guilty? You present the facts. But there's a third branch to rhetoric that we call epideictic, which is not about if you're guilty or not, or about decisions for the future or the past. It's about what is honorable, what is virtuous, and devoted to present, to honor someone often, sometimes to blame also. This type of rhetoric is used at funeral eulogies, ceremonies, public festivals. Unconcerned with the debate, it aims to reinforce the community of social values and to edify. Very, also, again, ethical in nature. So this could not describe Mendelssohn's better. He is so epideictic in a lot of his repertoire. His dedication and pursuit to elevated and shared ethical values that were honorable and universal, as we saw stemming from his faith, cannot be missed. I call it the ceremonial topic for Mendelssohn. He uses it so much that I think it's a topic when you look at all of his works. He loved to write music concerned with praises, doxologies, crafted for large orchestral forces, and of course strongly associated with Handel. We're going to listen together to an excerpt, and I'm sure you will understand the very strong ceremonial aspects of this music. Let's listen. As you can hear, everybody is on their feet, ready to go. We are celebrating something. Even if you don't understand the text, you know we're celebrating. You know there's a ceremony going on. He loves that incessant rhythm punctuating the music. Ta-ta, ta-ti, ta-ta. You can think of French overture if you'd like, which is also very ceremonial. You can hear a lot of connection also to Handel. Let's not talk too much about it, and let's move on to the second part of this presentation, the case study. And let's see how he uses classical rhetoric, but also musical rhetoric. Let's talk about the textual zoom that I discussed. Is he close to the text or higher up? How does he deal with the problem we discussed also of having music and text together? A little bit of context for you. Goethe, yes, none other than Goethe wrote this ballad in 1799 and sent it to Mendelssohn's teacher, Zelter, that we discussed, that also taught Meyerbeer. And he sent it to him, and Zelter could not put it to music. He tried 3 times. The text was too difficult. So he thought, hey, I have a very gifted student named Felix Mendelssohn. Maybe he could do it. Mendelssohn also met with Goethe 3 times in his life. And the last time he passed through his house, it was during the Grand Tour. And following that encounter, he started in Italy to write Die erste Walpurgisnacht. He worked on it for a long time. He finished in Paris, 1832. and it was premiered in Berlin after his Grand Tour in 1833, inside where? None other than the Singakademie Hall, but not with the Singakademie singing. The work was revised 9 years later, 9 years, going back to Horace. In his Ars Poetica, there's a rule for the poet that when you write a work, you should let it rest for 9 years and go back to it and see if you would still change something. And Mendelssohn here, incidentally, waited 9 years before reviewing the cantata. The premiere was given in 1842 at the Gewandhaus. The work generated a multiplicity of sketches, drafts, revision, as is always the case with the composer. Unfortunately, Zeta and Goethe did not hear because they both passed away before the premiere of the work. I really like this picture. Let's talk about what is this work? A very, very quick synopsis. So on the eve of May 1st, so on April 30th, the Christianized feast day of the Anglo-Saxon missionary called Saint Walpurga is celebrated. But before being Christianized, or a Christian holiday, it was a pagan holiday, like you can think of Christmas and many other holidays. And originally, the pagan feast celebrated the arrival of spring with the lighting of bonfires, and often on mountains. By the way, this is something that a lot of Scandinavian countries still do today. It's a known feast to do that. Some people do it on the solstice, but anyways, let's move on. And it was also known in German folklore as the witches' Sabbath on top of the Brocken, which is the highest peak of the Harz mountain. Accordingly, Goethe's poem tells the story of the Druids' effort hiking up the Brocken's top to offer their rituals and sacrifices to the Allvater, the father of the universe, despite the threat of the Christians' persecution, who were following the Pope's order and not to have these type of pagan holidays. Instead of hiding, one of the Druid priests comes along and says, "Why are we hiding? We should come up with a better plan. We should scare the Christian off with their own superstitions. They're afraid of the devil. We're not the devil. We're just another religion. So there you go. Why don't we come up with a cunning scheme to outwit the medieval, dim-witted, gullible Christians and put forth a masquerade." I'm using the exact word, by the way, in the text. "And we're going to put forth a masquerade in which they dress as wolfmen and dragon women and other hellish creatures." And they do that, and it works. The ploy succeeds. The Christians flee in terror. They flee the mountain, leaving the Druids alone to offer their ritual around the fire. So you have to understand now, this was for Mendelssohn. It was not a duty or a task. It was pure pleasure. He was happy to tackle a task like that because he had a very strong fascination for the supernatural, witches especially. A few years before, he had composed the Hexenlied, right? The song of the witch, in 1829. To his sister, he writes, "The thing," the actual word, "the erste Walpurgisnacht, can really be fun. For at the beginning, there are plenty of spring songs and such, and then, when the watchmen raise a ruckus with their pitchforks and spikes and owls, the witch's spook is added. And you know I have a particular weakness for that. Then the Druids, ready to sacrifice, come out in C major with trombones. Then again the watchmen, and finally at the end a complete sacrificial song." So as you can hear, it really struck a chord with Mendelssohn. He loved the stories, he loved the supernatural, and the musical possibilities were so obvious in the text that he could not resist, and he was very happy to work on this twice. Also, the text is geared toward the typical romantic imagination, with its return to folklore, abundant elements of nature's, contrasting element, the day, the night, the good, the bad weather, and the characters also, which are typically romantic. And so let's dig into the music now. Cyclic form, thematic transformation, or rhetoric. Which one is it? Here you have in a little, how many bars is that? I think it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's it. In 8 little bars, you have the work. You have 30 minutes of music. There it is. He can encapsulate in the first few bars everything that will happen. It's quite something. And not only that, he wrote this last. He wrote the overture to the piece when he was in Paris. Now, most probably it was inside his mind because everything that follows is a development of this to some extent. The main motive that I'd like you to see tonight is X in green, motive X, which goes from scalary 5, 5, 1, 2, 3. The other important motif is in red, and that's a descending chromatic line, which we call, is known in musical rhetoric, as passus domiusculus, or the chromatic fourth, or even the lament, is using that. And look, this is very interesting, at the tail of the motive, the first motive, is the beginning of the second motive. We have a Seufzen motif. And so many movements are using this tonight, and we're going to talk about it. Let's listen. Here we go. So short, but everything is there. So this is a tour de force in thematic cyclicity. The whole work is based on these three motifs, and I try to keep the same colors so we can find ourselves. And they're very, it talks about, it is cyclicity, and this is a known thing in theory. We talk about cyclic work. But it is also his mastery of the logos. He can take what we call a loci topici, which is your opening subject, or your main subject out of which you will develop your oration. So his loci topici is very clear, and he's developing out of which. Also, the central idea, interestingly, it also serves as a peroratio. What's a peroratio? Is when you close your oration, when you close your speech, you want to review all the points you just did. But he's reviewing the points at the beginning. So it gives a cyclic or a sense of continuity or circle. Also, we have an exordium. Exordium in rhetoric is when it's the ta-da, here I am. It's how you openly grab the attention of your public. And the opening, if we listen again, is very quick exordium. And you cannot have a better exordium in classical music than 1, 5, 1. 1, 5, 1. Exordium, and now loci topici, which is all. Lastly, I think there's another influence going on here from the Baroque, which we call the Vocaleinbau. It's a technique used by Bach. It's a Baroque technique where we have a ritornello exposed in the beginning, and outside of this ritornello, all the elements will be taken out. So everything that will be sung and played after are sort of recycling of that first exposition. And he knew so well the works of Bach that I think there's a little bit of a technique of Vocaleinbau there. Here are different transformations we have in the piece. I will not go through all of them. It's just to show you how the first motif, X, that I show you in green, the first one here, starting on E, is then used in F. It's used in A major. It's used in E major. It's used also in the accompaniment, or it's used in changing the order. I could have 3 pages of this tonight. There's something else that I discovered in the piece that was not looked at before, and I'm a bit surprised. There's another motif, and it's a single note motif. One note, E. The note E is the unifying and connecting thread of the whole piece. It's quite something. Melodically, nearly every main melodic line, both vocal and instrumental, begins on end on the note E. More than that, the high points of melodic lines often end up on being on E on important words related to the song. The month of May, to love your past customs, the flame or the smoke of the fire, right? Or the flee, when the Christians flee at the end. I'm saying here that it's a little bit somehow the precursor of Berg, Alban Berg's, his famous Wozzeck opera. He uses the note B to symbolize the murder motif, but we have an example here way before Berg. So E also, the note E acts as a pivot, and look how clever this is. E, these are the main keys of the piece: A minor, A major, E major, and C major. It's really the main places we go in the piece. The note E is the 5th in A minor. It's the 5th in A major. In E major, it's the root. And in C major, when we conclude the piece, it's the 3rd. What do we get? 5, 5, 1, 3, the main motive of the work. So that's why you have the triangle there. We have, as a good orator, he has the single note. The loci topici is actually a note out of which come 3 other motifs, and then we have transformations, endless transformations of the other motif. Cryptograms, signatures, and musical rhetoric. Now, So some of you might say, well, did I not hear this melody somewhere before? Hang on a second, it sounds kind of, I've heard this. That's what one of my choristers said at the St. Lawrence Choir. Well, you would be right. If you look at the second example, this is a Scottish symphony, which was written at the same time as this piece. And look how similar. 5, 1, 2, 3, 2, 4. It begins almost with the exact same note, and it's in the same key. I did not modify this. I give you other examples, and again here, I could have 3 pages of examples that are using this motif 5, 1, 2, 3. So that got me thinking, why is Mendelssohn using this motif so often in his works? I realized that there's another motif, instead of the one in Die erste Wahl ist not, but in another piece called Lobgesang, that would really epitomize what I'm trying to get at. This one is a little bit different. 5, 6, 5, 1, 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 3. I put in green the important, and there are on the strong beat, as you can see, right? 5, 6, 5, 1, 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 3. So all the important beats are covering the 5, 1, 2, 3. And that got me thinking, why is he using that theme so often? Could he have a signature line, a signature? A lot of orators have a signature. My signature tonight is very clear. I have a thick French accent. You can't miss it. It's there. But why with Mendelssohn would he? So I thought, okay, Felix Mendelssohn, yeah, we all know the B-A-C-H. He used that, B flat, A, C, B natural. But it kind of doesn't work. Felix in the F, okay? Mendelssohn's in M, okay, we don't have a note for M. And then Bartholdy is a B flat. Well, it's true that it started with a perfect fourth. But then I decided to look into the letters a little bit more closely, and what did I find? The letter 1243 to his sister Rebecca, he concludes the letter signing F, M, and B flat. Look at that. Could that be that he knew about cryptograms? I don't know, I didn't speak with him, but he knew about the BACH. Not just that, his mentor, or his one of his idol, I don't like the term too much, but his maître à penser was Bach, as some of you know, and Handel. And Bach had a lot of dedication and prayers at the end, as you know. I can give you some examples, the Soli Deo Gloria. And differently, but also Mendelssohn had Hilf du mir, and Lass es gelingen, Gott, let it succeed, O Lord. So similarly to Bach, he also had the dedication at the end of his pieces. So all of this combined pushes me to see that I think that the 5, 1, 2, 3 is a signature line for Mendelssohn, particularly in B flat major. We'll talk about keys in a second, but B flat major represents the key of worship for the composer. And it's linked to G minor, the Jewish key, and one is working with the other. And we'll see that. But what comes out of this, again, is celebratory, epidectic, as we saw together, rising, noble, dotted, ceremonial, all things we can see in this. Just to give you more support, I'm not going to stay there too long, but he was very well aware of the Bach cryptogram because he performed a recital at the St. Thomas Church, the Kirche, in August 6, 1840, and where he performed a long improvisation on BACH. So he knew about it, and we're going to see how he uses it. Now let's have some kind of, I see the time is going very quickly. I think I'm going to have, unfortunately, to skip this, because it's my time is going very quickly. But I wanted to show you an example here. I'll put it in the paper, where I wanted to go on keyboard and play this, but that's okay. I took a movement, a single movement, where I discussed all the different rhetorical elements. And if you see sort of the mauve, violet color there, that's all the Seufzen motif and how he can craft a full movement using just his signature and a Seufzen motif. It's quite clever, actually. And in it, also, we see what? If you look at the top here, page 3, B-A-C-H. And we have a bunch of B-A-C-H that are hidden into it. A few pictorial realism that we have in the music, I call it feathers, wings, and fireflies. So the piece does have some birds, it's unmistakable. And I wasn't sure which owl it was, but let's listen to the screech owl. So this is a minor third with a tremolo, right? And see, here is Mendelssohn's rendition in the piece. So you can hear the birds there in the background, and there's quite a bit of it, but I'm going to have to skip that and to move on. So I was wondering too, even about insects, because he uses another very, very cool motif in the strings, very fast, and we can hear the wings. So the wings are there very clearly. The other excerpt here was coming from the creation, hiding, where maybe that's where he took. Oh yeah, that's the insects. That's the dragonflies. All right, I'll stop that one. Let's try for this one. Okay. Same third. Okay, I'm gonna have to skip that. So when I said that he had a particular witness, why is he using this sort of like feathers and wings? Because Mendelssohn, we know that he loved the elfin, the fairy style, and these are 4 examples that he uses, and we're not going to have time, but here's an example, the famous example from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Quite loud, right? You recognize this? Staccato, pianissimo. By the way, this is the MGSO playing. This is the McGill Symphony Orchestra. Okay, let's skip all these examples. Skip. Whoops. Too fast. Okay, so fondness for the supernatural, something I did find in the music that was not covered, is the Hungarian minor scale. I'm not sure here, but I was thinking maybe it's for the witches that are flying around the mountain. But he uses here A minor, harmonic minor with a raised 4th degree, and that's called sometimes the double harmonic minor, and he uses that in the music. It adds a very big supernatural flavor to it. I'm going to have to more. I was wondering, where is this from? Because I have to compare other repertoire and see, is he just do it once, or is he doing it again? And there you go. He does it in Elijah. Right after Elijah is taken up to heaven into a chariot of fire, he uses for the last chorus the same scale. It's very short. It's the same scale. 1 with a raised 4th degree. He uses it also when God appears to him in a small, still voice. It's the same scale in E minor. So all 3 scenes point to the supernatural. It involves flying, the air, the wind, the light, the fire, and the darkness. So many elements that are. Here it was just to talk about a little bit the rule of 3 and get closer to rhetoric, because he uses the number 3 everywhere in the piece. Everywhere. And this comes a little bit from the oral tradition of folk tales, which are often based on 3 for ease of memory, but also for emotional impact. I give you a few examples: 3 wishes, 3 guesses, 3 little pigs. So many stories uses that. We have the same in this music. I'm going to go a little bit quick here. Here's an example of how he's using the 3. The text does not repeat with Goethe, but he decides to repeat Mendelssohn, Grüne, and I put it in green. Why? Because green was Mendelssohn's favorite color. So he decides to say that this is springtime and we see green all over us. So which word am I going to repeat 3 times? Oh yes, green, you got it. So, der Schnee ist fort am grünen Ort. Am grünen, right? Amplification, gradation. So an example of that, and then I had some other examples how he uses 3 in music. It will be in the paper. A few words about the keys, the light and the darkness. I decided to compare, as I said, many works from the composer to see what kind of meaning he gives to different keys. In the corner on the right, I decided also to compare what Matheson is an important theorist that talks a lot about rhetoric, and I thought it was interesting to compare with what Matheson said. But here are examples of how he uses the green, and how also an example from Haydn's creation, 5-1-2-3, it's in A major, same of the motif, the signature motif. Also another interesting thing is that in the story, we begin in A major, it's springtime, and right at the midpoint of the story, midday, where do we go? E major. So it gets brighter. And one way for Mendelssohn to do that is to follow the circle of 5th and to go on the right side and to get brighter. And when he goes to sunset, we go to A minor and we go back a few 5th to A minor. C major is very big in Mendelssohn's music to represent the presence of God, the divine, or pure light. A few examples here. The first one is well known. This is Haydn's Creation, when the light came in. So many say that he set the standard for other composers afterwards. So a very beautiful example here in Elijah, when the little boy goes up the mountain to see if the rain is coming. To represent the purity of a young boy, he goes to C major, right? Or when he talks about the 3 times holiness of God, when the angels are singing, where does he go? C major. What do we have in our piece? He goes to C major here at the end for the divine. Now, divine for whom? The Al-Fatah, for the pagans, but it's still the divine. He goes in C major, and that's a really cool thing. In the bass, he quotes the opening motif backwards and forwards in A minor, representing the night. And the day, it's in C major in the story. And where does it line up? Both on which note? E, the single motif note of the whole piece. It's really clever. I'm going to skip it. Another way that he shows light, again with the circle of fifth, he says, your light at the end, and he goes from 1 to 5 to G major, so he goes on the right side of circle of fifth. However, when he repeats the motif 2 movements later, he goes the other way around. I was wondering about that. He goes to F major and then B flat major. But it's this idea that this decimation of light. Light goes both sides of the circle of fifth. It goes all around everybody. Everywhere is the light. It's inside of us. It could be also outward. F sharp is the pagan key. We see that very clearly in Elijah with the Baal worship. We see the same here for the pagan customs in our piece. And I had an interesting case here, just 1 minute on that. In St. Paul, his oratorio, on the conversion on the Damascus road, when the Lord appears to Saul before he became Paul, and he says, why are you persecuting me? I was wondering, why is it in F sharp minor? If the Lord is appearing to Saul, I would expect C major, we just saw divine light. And then I clicked. Paul is the apostle of whom? The pagans. So Mendelssohn uses F sharp minor when he appears to Saul. And later in the piece, when Ananias comes along and the same motif reappears, now it's in C major because it's after the conversion. Very interesting. I'm going to skip those. A quick word also in G minor. I could have here 3 pages of examples. Often when Mendelssohn turns to text from the Old Testament or to the Psalms or to a story about, I think the best way to describe it is the daughters of Zion, because he often crafts G minor with soprano alto in thirds together to sing. Very strong melancholy. It's interesting, we could discuss it. The second example here is not a vocal piece, it's in the Reformation Symphony, Symphony number 5. And in this example here, there's no text, so I cannot tell you for sure he represents this as Jewish key, but it's the Reformation Symphony. And right before we hear Ein fester Burg is Unser Gott, the famous hymn that everybody sings, so which is about Christianity. He has a wink to, I think, Judaism, because Christianity came out of Judaism. And he quotes that G minor in the 3rd movement, which is very beautiful, and in which we hear another song called Evenu Shalom Aleichem, if you know the song. I'm going to skip those examples. And then lastly, we see many things that are round in the piece, constantly. And a nice example to show you this, because they are dancing, right, in the mountain as they have their pagan, they're trying to scare off the Christian, but they dance. The word that Goethe used is Rundgeheule. They are making a round dancing and Heule, they were yelling and screaming to scare them off. So we have lots of circles and cyclicity in the piece. So here's an example between the tenor and the basses where they repeat the same line over and over 3 times, and it goes like a cannon, it goes in circle, right? Another very clever way that he does that is in rhetoric what we call circulo mezzo, where you go up a third, da ya da 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 da, creates a circle, or da 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 da, circles this way, right? So if you put the 2 lines together from soprano alto that go down this circulo mezzo, and you take the tenor and basses it creates together, the circle. That's really cool. Conclusion. Mendelssohn did not aim to reform art, but rather perfect his musical ideas within the bedrock of normative conventions, as established by composers before him. He did not despise early music or old classical literature. Even as a child of his time, he knew the wisdom they contained, and that one should learn from them. Rhetorical elements, both from classical literature and Baroque music, subtly, thank you, find their way in Mendelssohn's vocal orchestral composition amidst, yes, a truly romantic language to help enhancing and defining his thoughts. He loathed extremes and approached art as a funambulist, as we talked, keeping in tension the three persuasive appeals. It was all a question of degree and balance, thus granting a strong eloquence. Mendelssohn's idiosyncrasies in his vocal orchestral repertoire, taking the form of topics and signatures, reveal much about its content, context, ideas, and emotions. And with all due consideration, I believe, for future research, this information could prove potentially revealing and bring significance to his purely instrumental pieces. On this note, I will now invite the panel, if they have questions first, and then we'll open the floor after that to the audience.
Hi, Philippe. Thanks so much.
Hi.
It's Nicole. Hi. Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. You covered a lot of ground, maybe more than I thought you could in the time available. And the parts about the music went by kind of quickly, so I'm really looking forward to reading about this in more depth. But one thing struck me when you mentioned the fairy music from the Midsummer Night's Dream overture. It seems to me that the beginning of Die Erste Walpurgisnacht has some similarities in terms of texture and orchestration and rhythmic density. They kind of start with the same gesture. You know, they have these held chords in the wind that help establish the key, and then followed by these running 16th notes in the violins.
That's right.
That, in Midsummer Night's Dream, these represent the fairies, right? And I think there, in Midsummer Night, it's a little bit more otherworldly because the winds are in a higher register. And you don't have the brass as well, like you do in Die Erste Walpurgisnacht. And also, famously, in Midsummer Night's Dream, the harmonies are backwards. It goes 1, 5, 4,
yes.
1. And anyone who's taken music theory, classical music theory, you know that 5 doesn't go to 4. 4 goes to 5. This is not true in the blues, but this is in the classical world. This is called a retrogression, and it's seen it kind of backwards. So I think there, it's kind of signals that the fairies are in control. But in Die Erste Walpurgisnacht, maybe the harmonic progression is completely normative, maybe because it's the humans that are in control. But so I am leading to a question here, which is that I know that you're planning on talking about a lot of Mendelssohn's references to earlier music, particularly Bach. But I wonder if you're going to deal with these kind of potential self-references as well.
You said the soft references?
Self-references. Like, so where Mendelssohn might seem to be quoting his own music.
Yes.
Like you already gave an example of that just with that melody, the 5, 5, 1, 2, 3,
yes.
which it's kind of a basic gesture, but in combination with the dotted rhythm, I think
yes.
that becomes very characteristic.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure I understand the question though. That was many things you just said, but you want me to discuss more examples across the repertoire of his own repertoire where he uses rhetorical devices?
I'm not asking you to do that here and now, but I'm wondering if that's the plan for the later chapters of the thesis.
Yes, I skipped many of the examples that sort of helped to see how the keys made sense, but you're right, I didn't do it so much in terms of rhetorical elements. It was mainly around the keys that I did it. For the idiosyncrasies at least, yes. So I can do that in the paper, yes.
Yeah, sounds good. And I guess I have one other, it's not really a question, but I think maybe not everyone in here, I had the chance to look it up when I read your thesis, but I think not everyone knows what a funambulist is, and you should tell them.
Oh, yeah. So, un funambule en français, right?
Okay, people do know. Est-ce que c'est le même mot en français?
Oui, français, funambule, yeah.
Même les anglophones.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
Next speaker.
So you said it's a tightrope what?
Tightrope
Tightrope walker, yes, that's exactly. This represents really well his approach. One last thing, if I may, Nicole, on what you said about the backward progression. I skipped that in the presentation, but Mendelssohn was very fond of Jean-Paul Richter. And he wrote many books, and he was an excerpt in his novels of the dreams. And in the Midsummer Night's Dream, often theorists, as you mentioned that he has backward progression because we're going back into the dream, so we're going backwards this way. So I find that the elephant in the scherzo way of, it's connected to the dream very much so. He must have had really good dreams, Mendelssohn, because he loved that repertoire. And in his 1844 library, he had the complete works of Jean-Paul Richter filled with the dream. So I just want maybe to add this to what you said. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much.
Merci Philippe pour cette super présentation. My question is just to invite you maybe to speak a bit more about what comes next for you in terms of bridging the gap with all this research and what is coming, I think, in 1 month exactly, which is the performance of this piece, with many people in this hall, I think, performing with you. If you could maybe expand on how the findings that you presented tonight will impact your both rehearsal process, but also your musical choices that you will be presenting in a month in the performance of this piece.
Certainly, thank you. Great question. Most of you that know me know that I am a teacher also. I love to teach. I cannot stop teaching. I just do it all the time. It's something very strong in me. And to come back to your question, we have already been in class because Vanier College is performing in the upcoming concert, and so is the St. Lawrence Choir, and the invitation is coming up soon. We have been discussing in rehearsal those elements and those referentialities and those images and pictorialism and tone painting. So, and we keep on building. And more than that, I invited also the singers, at least at Vanier in class, to find examples of the BACH or the signature or the 5-1-2-3. Not too much because we have to rehearse, but still, it's good to see, as most of them are doing German for the first time. They have to really know what the text says and how Mendelssohn is appropriately discussing that text musically, and if he's not. For example, one of the things I wanted to discuss was the question number 3. We saw it in class a little bit before, but that's something that can translate also into the conducting. Mendelssohn is using the tricolon. That's a key word, and this is known quite a bit in literature and also in rhetoric. You say something 3 times to have a greater emotional impact, and I hope that can translate into the conducting, so that when you have this repetition, you should have a greater emphasis also in the conducting. So those gestures, I hope, can inform my studying the score, but also my gestures, and be eloquent also, and join those elements. So that's the plan. You're also asking me a question about the other repertoire?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay, I thought you wanted me to see how this, okay, good. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So at this point, we open the floor to any questions from the public. We've never seen such a large audience at a lecture. I said that only to preface a request that only good questions be posed to. So if anyone would like to put up their hand if they've got a question for Philippe. Okay, yes.
I see. Jochen, is that you?
Yes.
Yes, hi.
So have all those 5,000 letters been translated to English?
No. So quite a few. His son and his nephew, Sebastian Hensel and Paul Mendelssohn, published first. They were the first one. They started with the years 1830 to 1832, the travel years, and this was translated to English. Then they moved to selected letters all the way to 1847. But at the time, since relatives of the family were still alive, they edited those letters a lot, and they cut out a lot of things that either made someone or they used just one letter for names of other people so it wouldn't put people at shame or things like that. So for different reasons, we had gradually access to English, but it remains that the complete works we have access today are still fully just in German, and these are just his letters. The 7,000 answers or letters written to him are not accessible. They're still in Oxford, and it's complicated to go there and have some excerpts. People, when they have a very precise field of study, they will go and release excerpts of those letters. But no, you have to dig in quite a bit. I'm going to mention soon, I had some help for my German because it's not perfect. Someone else?
Anyone else? Yes.
Andy Gray, the great conductor, is here.
Hi. You spoke earlier about how words and music from Mendelssohn
Yes.
meet on a higher plane
Yes.
very often.
Yes.
And I wanted to do a case study, seeing as it's a piece that seems to champion pagan ritual over Christianity, and Mendelssohn's very profound and very deep beliefs and faith. Is there something to be spoken for, or do you have anything that you can enlighten me about where, related to your case study, where does the music say something else? Does the music allow Christianity and God to triumph, or I don't know, the key structures are transparent in the way that, how does he flip it, and how does he sort of manage to make that higher plane become the place where the music and the text meet?
Actually, this has produced quite a bit of scholarly research, mainly because there are two lines to your question. There's a lot of symbolism first in Goethe's text, and this is filled with symbolism. Musically, Mendelssohn takes some of that symbolism, but not all of it. And to come back to your question, I did not discuss this in my paper too much because that in itself, the symbolism in the text could be a case study. But what I would say is this, where it does meet up, where you were asking, is the ethos again. Is that when the pagan worship happens, it was genuine worship, even though it was not Christian worship. And therefore, it's very interesting because when you look at the music, if you would close your eyes to the text that it's a pagan worship, you would think it's a Lutheran hymn singing. So the worship is still very genuine, very much so. And he allowed someone from a different faith maybe, but that person, coming back to the ethos, had to be genuine in their faith, even if it was not his faith. The second thing I'll say is that his grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, was one of the father of tolerance in Germany. And even though he was Jewish and he remained Jewish, he accepted that his children were not and converted. And he was one of the father of tolerance and religious tolerance. So that's why I would say the center thing I could answer would say there's a lot of religious tolerance, and that's where the music goes, on a bedrock of ethos and genuineness. Thanks.
Are there any questions from actors who have not been planted in the audience? Any more questions? Yes, the second one.
It's not really a question, I don't want to take up too much time, but
Please.
I just wanted to say, on behalf of, I think, all VEGA students and everyone from the bar, that we're very proud of you and we're very happy to have you as a mentor.
Thank you, Laura.
On that note, thanks very, very much, Philippe. Congratulations, and your committee and I are greatly looking forward to your final thesis.
Thank you so much. One final note. Were you done?
Yes.
Okay. So a few acknowledgements. I really have to do that. I consulted some great scholars that really know about Mendelssohn much more than I do. Douglas Seaton and Dr. John Michael Cooper, and they both accepted to meet with me and discuss a few things. Also, my advisory committee, which is here once more. I'm very thankful for your help and for when I had questions, and for your guidance and for your corrections. Also, I want to mention the name of Claude Routier, who was so patient to translate some of that material for the thesis, and he's done so many other things that have been so much helpful. And of course, I want to take the time to thank my lovely wife, Nadia Bousakis-Bourque, that is here tonight somewhere in the car. She's right there. She's been very patient. We have 4 beautiful girls. It's been quite the ride. Lastly, you're invited to the concert. Make it a note, April 20th. Yes, that's right. At Maison Symphonique, 7:30, we will perform this piece and other pieces. Rimsky-Korsakov, Svitezyanka, and Sibelius Neufried, 2 Canadian premiere, not to be missed. On this note, my selected bibliography, I can send it to someone if you want to really see it. And that's it. Have a great night. Thank you so much. So please come say hi.